This interview is being audio and video recorded. You have been arrested for the preparation, instigation, or commission of acts of terrorism. Do you understand why you've been arrested?
Yeah, but I don't, agree that I did anything wrong.
Okay, well, the purposes of these interviews is for us to establish the facts.
Sure.
I'll just explain to you.
In a room at Paddington Green Police Station in West London, a middle-aged man sits across from two British detectives. It's a cramped space, soundproofed with grey felt covering the walls. It's September 22nd, 2001. 11 days earlier, on September the 11th, 4 planes were hijacked and 3 crashed into American landmarks. 2 into the Twin Towers in New York and 1 into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. 2,977 people from at least 90 countries were killed. Investigators around the globe were dispatched to find out how the world's deadliest terror attack could have happened and who was behind it. And thousands of miles away from the devastation, this man has been arrested in Birmingham. His name is Omar al-Bayoumi.
Do you agree to this interview being recorded on video, first of all?
I'm not sure, because, I have to, for example, get response from the embassy to make sure it's okay or not.
Is that to...
He has to get a response from the embassy first. By the embassy, al-Bayoumi means the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
As I understand it, you have already spoken with representatives from the Saudi embassy this morning, is that correct?
Yeah.
In the days after the 9/11 attacks, we were told explicitly who did it.
Under attack.
President George W. Bush addressed the nation on the 20th of September.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country? The evidence we have gathered all points to a collection of loosely affiliated terrorist organizations known as Al-Qaeda.
But 24 years on, a $1 trillion lawsuit from families of the 9/11 victims is now alleging that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia supported al-Qaeda in carrying out this attack. And Omar al-Bayoumi is at the heart of that lawsuit. Because while in 2001, al-Bayoumi was released by British police acting under the instruction of American law enforcement, today he stands accused of being a Saudi agent who helped the hijackers who carried out 9/11, something he's always denied.
There were always pieces missing, questions that never went away.
This is Amardeep Bassi. He's been following this trail for more than 20 years.
If those pieces had been in place at the time, there's a chance that we could have disrupted some of the major events that took place after 9/11.
Today, in this exclusive investigation from the Sunday Times, we're going to piece it all together for the first time. I'm Taryn Siegel, a producer at The Story. This is The 9/11 Suspect, Part 1, The Widow.
My name is Amardeep Bassi. I've been a journalist for 30 years now, mainly reporting and operating out of the West Midlands area, but I've travelled the world in reporting. My specialisms, I suppose, have been crime, extremism, radicalism, terrorism, all the kind of interesting, toxic stuff, I suppose.
All of it, which kind of crosses together into this story, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's had a bit of it all.
Where does this particular story start for you?
The story, I suppose, starts on 9/11, or just before 9/11. So I had just started work at the local newspaper in Birmingham, The Sunday, Mercury, which obviously came out on a Sunday, which gave us more time to get stories together and be a bit more thorough and investigative. And Birmingham has a very large and young Muslim population. And even before 9/11, I was beginning to do stories relating to Islamism. So I was getting a feel for that pre-9/11.
Do you remember where you were the morning of 9/11?
Yeah, on Tuesday, September the 11th, I remember coming back from, I won't say a boozy lunch, but we'd been to the pub, me and my colleagues. Tuesday was the start of the week for us Sunday paper journalists. We'd have the Monday and the Sunday off. And I just remember coming back into the office from lunch. I remember it being quite a dull, drizzly day, and just being in kind of the lobby and seeing on the TV screen there, basically a building on fire. And that had been the first plane had already slammed into the World Trade Center. I ran upstairs to watch the rest of it along with everybody else in the building. And as soon as I saw the second plane hit the tower, I automatically thought, this is Al-Qaeda.
Al-Qaeda literally means the base or the foundation in Arabic. It was the name of an international terrorist network that saw itself as leading a global Islamist revolution. 3 years earlier, Al-Qaeda had bombed 2 U.S. embassies in Africa, killing hundreds. But even so, at the time of the 9/11 attacks, very few people in the Western world had heard of Al-Qaeda. One of them was Amardeep.
The signature being that these are simultaneous attacks, which for me bore all the hallmarks of Al-Qaeda, in particular the African embassy bombings, which were all coordinated.
Wow, it's amazing you knew it that quickly. I mean, I think for all of us who lived through it, we do have kind of a vivid memory of what happened on that day. And I was actually in New York, where I'm from. So I was on the North Shore of Long Island.
Yeah.
And I was just 11, so I didn't really understand what was happening. But I remember school was let out early. Like a lot of the parents at my school work in Manhattan or even work at the World Trade Center. And I just remember you can see Manhattan from my house on Long Island, and you could see, in my memory, you could see smoke billowing like for days, and it just didn't seem to ever stop.
I mean, did it make you feel scared at the time? Did you think you were in any...
I don't think I understood what was happening. So I don't think, I didn't understand why my parents were crying that day. You know, like I didn't really understand the true impact of it. And I guess, you know, for a lot of our listeners, that might be the case for them as well. I mean, it was 24 years ago.
Yeah.
And I don't really remember a world vividly pre-9/11, right? Like I don't really understand how the world shifted because I was too young to really appreciate it beforehand. So for those in my position, for those that don't have that memory, like how did the world change after this event?
In a lot of ways, both in kind of broad strokes and also in the nuanced details. I suppose it was as a lot of the world leaders, certainly the Western leaders, talked about the rules of the game have changed now. And people were thinking, well, what game? What rules? And I suppose what they were talking about is there was a certain tolerance of extreme, certainly as far as Islamic extremism is concerned, there was a lot of extremist leaders who had fled the Middle East and were happily settled in places like London, in New York. And so these people that, say, the security services had maybe been monitoring in a loose sense, there was a lot more urgency in, well, hang on, what have you been up to the last few years when you've been in this country? Or are you planning something in this country? And it was not just them in the crosshairs. For me, as a brown person born in the UK, it meant people who looked like me now were viewed on with slight suspicion, and certainly as far as Muslims were concerned. It meant the whole world all of a sudden was interested in Islam. Everybody wanted to know, well, what is this religion? Does it preach knocking down buildings and killing people? And so you could say almost that that was the beginning of the Muslim communities across the world, particularly in the West, really being scrutinized wholesale.
Within hours, intelligence services had begun to identify the 19 hijackers involved in the 9/11 attacks. All were Muslim and members of Al-Qaeda. They came from 4 countries: Lebanon, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and the majority, 15, from Saudi Arabia.
And of course, the tangible effects for us was, it certainly resulted in different, it being more problematic to travel. There's much tighter security around airports. Indeed, people stopped flying for a long time.
And I guess just our sense of safety maybe changed from pre-9/11 to after. I mean, maybe some of the things that we took for granted as, just the idea that, for Americans, the idea that there could be such a large-scale terrorist attack on American soil is kind of unthinkable.
Yeah, I think, again, particularly for Americans, it was a case of, well, why us? What have we done? I think they really, opened their eyes as to how we thought the world loved us. We are the bastion of the free world. And now these people want to kill us on our soil using our aeroplanes. So I think it was a real head-turner for the American public.
Why? Why would somebody want to kill my husband? Why would somebody want to murder Americans? Why would somebody want to attack our country so brutally?
This is Terry Strada. Her husband was killed when the World Trade Center was struck. She's been asking the same questions, following the same trail that Amardeep has been following for the past 24 years.
The families have been the driving force, really, as far as getting to the bottom of what exactly happened. I mean, we've been told almost that it was an open and shut case. Bin Laden did it, Al-Qaeda did it, we've killed Bin Laden, case closed. Seems to have been the official narrative. And Terry probably stands out because she has been so vocal and so tenacious in trying to find out the truth.
So September 11th, 2001 started out like any other weekday. Tom was getting up early for work. We had 3 children in the house, Thomas, Caitlin, and Justin. Thomas was getting up he was a first grader, was getting ready for school. Caitlin, it was her first day of nursery school, and Justin was just 4 days old. So on that morning, he got up for work, and I was getting up to tend to the children. Tom came into the nursery, and he bent down, and he kissed him on his tiny little toes, and he said, "I'll see you later, baby." And I picked him up and followed Tom to the top of the staircase. Tom went down and approached the front door. My brother was visiting. He was with him. And right before he left, he turned around and said, "I love you, and I'll be home early around 2. And that was the last time I ever saw my husband alive. Tom was a very charismatic man. He full of energy, always the life of the party, always somebody everybody was drawn to. He was also he was a great outdoorsman. He loved the outdoors. He loved to fish. He loved to golf. He was a scratch golfer, which...
Tom was actually working as an assistant golf pro when him and Terry met. Terry was home in Long Island for the summer, working as a waitress. She was 19. He had just turned 22.
I was standing in the kitchen getting my orders for the day. He came through, and our eyes met, and he scurried over to me really quickly and introduced himself. He's very confident. And, I'm Tom Strada. I'm an assistant golf pro here. And I was just, I don't know, probably my mouth fell open. He was so handsome.
They started dating that summer. And before the end of the year, Tom would have a big career shift.
So this was the summer before he went to work on Wall Street. Later in that year, being an assistant golf pro, he kind of thought, you know what, I think I want to be a member of the clubs, not working at country clubs. And somebody offered him an interview on Wall Street, and he went down, and, they loved him and hired him immediately, and he was very, very good at what he did.
By September 11th, 2001, Terry and Tom had been married for 9 years. Tom had been working at the World Trade Center as a corporate broker for a little over 4 years. He was 41 at the time. Terry was 38. That morning, after waving Tom goodbye from the top of the staircase, it wasn't long before Terry got a call.
I received 2 phone calls from Tom. The first one came right when he got to work. He picked up the phone. We didn't have cell phones back then yet. So he picks up the landline, and he calls me just to check in on the kids. So that was a quick phone call. Hung up, I jumped in the shower, and as I'm getting out of the shower, the phone's ringing again, and I almost didn't pick it up. But I ran over, and it was Tom again. Now this time, there was a real panic in his voice, and something I'd never heard before. And he said, Terry, he said, the building's been hit by a fucking airplane. Well, that just shot through my heart, and I could hear all this noise. It was just this background screaming of voices. So the fear, there was a real fear that was in his voice that transferred to me immediately. But I'm standing in front of the television. It's on NBC News, and there's nothing on the news, so I'm immediately thinking small airplane, and he's telling me this because, he's okay. And he says that he's with a group of people and that they have cell phones and that they're going to go to the stairwell and try to get out. But within minutes of hanging up the phone, it comes on the TV, and I see what the world is seeing.
We have a breaking news story to tell you about. Apparently, a plane has just crashed into the World Trade Center here in New York City. It happened just a few moments ago, apparently. We have very little information available at this point in time.
This black, billowing smoke coming out of the North Tower with this gaping hole, exactly where Tom worked. He was on the 104th floor of the North Tower when the plane hit, and I screamed out to my mother, Mom, he can't get out of that. No one can get out of that.
Also see some holes there that could have been from damage once the impact occurred. Again, we've been told that this is a plane. We don't have confirmation on that. But
and now, as you're watching more, you see bodies and people, they're waving white handkerchiefs. People are trying to, begging to be saved.
And we may actually see another plane enter the picture here in a second.
I wonder if there are air traffic control problems.
We're going to immediately check with air traffic control in the area to find out if they had contact with either of these planes before the accident. But what we've just seen is about the most shocking videotape I've ever seen.
What are the odds of two separate planes hitting both towers?
I didn't want my children to see any of this. So we only had the TV on in my bedroom, and the TV downstairs was playing, I don't know what, but something to help keep the kids occupied. So I didn't see the South Tower come down, but I was on the phone. A friend of mine who said, oh my God, you don't want to know what's happening right now.
Let's go back
in the Pentagon.
We just saw a live picture of what seemed to be a portion of the building falling away from the World Trade Center. If we can re-rack that to about 20 seconds ago, you'll see something dramatic happening. And I don't know whether it's another explosion or a portion of the building falling away, but something major just happened at that building.
It never occurred to me that Tom's building would also come down. Your psyche's just like, that's a fluke. Something was wrong with that building for that to have happened, or the fact that it was hit lower, kind of like, did it cut it in half, destabilize it in a different way. But I never thought for an instant that the North Tower was going to go down too, until it did. My life right there and then changed forever. My children's childhood and everything from that moment on has been through the lens of 9/11. What happened to Tom on 9/11, what happened to my country on 9/11, what happened to my friends on 9/11, and it's always there, and it never leaves you.
In the next few days, investigators asking those same questions would find themselves chasing a lead thousands of miles away in Birmingham. After coming back from lunch on that Tuesday and watching the wall-to-wall coverage of the Twin Towers being hit, Once Amardeep made the connection to al-Qaeda, he immediately started making phone calls.
So, as I said, I had already been doing or touched on stories to do with jihad and Islamism in Birmingham, mainly because, as I said, there's a very young Muslim population. And one of the first things I did was, in fact, on the Tuesday afternoon, was to call a contact who was a member of a group called Al-Muhajirun. Now, Al-Muhajirun was a bunch of British-born Muslims under the directorship or under the leadership of somebody called Sheikh Omar Bakri Mohammed, who, for want of a better phrase, you could call was a radical Islamic preacher. And he called for jihad. He encouraged jihad. He said it was a duty of all young Muslims to go to jihad.
Can you just explain, what does that mean? What is jihad? What does it mean to go to jihad?
So jihad is it's become a controversial term, but it isn't really. In its pure essence, it means struggle. And most Muslims would see that as the daily struggle to fight temptation, to live a good life. Most people would recognize jihad in their everyday lives, not as an action where you are fighting or preparing to fight, but just those little daily, hundreds of little struggles and dilemmas you might have of, am I doing the right thing? That is jihad as far as I'm concerned, yeah.
Got it. So in the days after, you're looking into, you said, a preacher in the Birmingham area who is preaching jihad. So I guess in his interpretation, what does that mean? In his interpretation, it purely and utterly means fighting. Groups like Al-Muhajirun talked about having a global Islamic empire, essentially, and they saw it as their duty to convert the world to Islam. They thought it was inevitable and that they are just helping that along. So I spoke to Al-Muhajirun's representative in Birmingham, who was in a very celebratory mood when I spoke to him. He was also watching it live and was kind of reveling in it, I suppose, more or less saying this is what America's had this coming. And then he invited me to a meeting that Al-Muhajirun was having that same Saturday, like just days after 9/11, which I did attend. And that was the first time that the call was made for British Muslims to go out and fight against the Americans wherever they can find them. Jeez. I mean, by then, within days of the attack, there was already talk of America invading Afghanistan because that's where bin Laden was. And at this meeting on the Saturday in Birmingham, young British Muslims who were in the audience were told, it's your duty to fight any British soldiers who go out to fight the Taliban. You've got to fight your own soldiers, in essence. As far as groups like Al-Muhajirun were concerned, they were framing what had happened as, this is war and we are soldiers. Within days of that, or sort of, I think the week after, the Friday after, the 21st of September, West Midlands Police suddenly put out a press release, just a very brief statement, as they always do, saying, we have made an arrest today in Birmingham in relation to the 9/11 attacks. So you can imagine, I'm thinking, wow, a Birmingham connection to the 9/11 attacks. What is this connection? Who is this guy? And it all took us to an address at Highgate Street in Birmingham, which was a pretty nondescript kind of property. But what was distinct about it, it was literally right next door to Birmingham's Central Mosque, sort of the main mosque in Birmingham. And this guy was, where all the journalists had gathered, was at this address there. And who was living at that address?
So at that address, we were told there was a Saudi student, a mature Saudi student by the name of Omar Al-Bayoumi.
This Omar Al-Bayoumi.
I have to, for example, get response from the embassy to make sure it's okay or not.
The man who would later, after his arrest, insist on speaking with the Saudi embassy before agreeing to be recorded. And, who was this man? It took, 10 days after the attacks for him to be arrested. Who was it? We know he's a mature student. Okay, so Omar Al-Bayoumi was a Saudi who had moved to San Diego in California in the early 90s. And after 9/11, obviously the authorities in America picked up a lot of clues immediately as to who the hijackers were. And then obviously
then went to places where they were last seen or addresses, and they found out that the 2 Pentagon hijackers had lived in San Diego. So they immediately went to San Diego, they had their addresses, and neighbours and people in San Diego had told investigators that these 2 hijackers, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, had been very close friends with a guy called Omar al-Bayoumi, who was a little older than them. In fact, they went a bit further. They said, al-Bayoumi had some kind of party for them where there was a lot of men there, and it had been recorded on camcorder. So immediately the FBI are thinking, there's footage out there of al-Bayoumi with 2 of the hijackers. That's a start.
So he's a person of interest, basically,
he's a
as a
person
result.
of interest. And so immediately it was a case of where is he now? And it didn't take them long to work out that he'd actually left San Diego in July 2001 and was now enrolled as a mature student at Aston University and was living in Birmingham. I mean, the British police had no idea that Omar al-Bayoumi was in this country or was studying or what his background was. They were totally in the hands of the FBI.
So the FBI, I guess, alert the British police to the fact that he's resident in Birmingham. And then it's the British police who actually arrest al-Bayoumi, is that right?
The arrest was made by British officers, and because the arrest was in Birmingham, it was the local police force, West Midlands Police, that made the arrest. An officer called Detective Constable Ian Dean. He was then very quickly joined by somebody from the Met Police's counter-terror squad, which at the time was called SO13, Special Operations 13. And so one of its members, somebody called David Campbell, raced down from London, where they were based, and came to Birmingham to pick up al-Bayoumi, who was being housed at a police station there. And together with Ian Dean, the 2 of them drove him to London at some speed.
As the detectives headed to London with Omar al-Bayoumi in tow, Amardeep, back in Birmingham, was desperate to find out more about this arrest. And it wasn't just Amardeep. A whole crowd of international journalists were parked at Highgate Street, hoping to find some answers. And that's when Amardeep got a tip-off.
I obviously reporting out of Birmingham for quite a while before then. I had a lot of contacts in the Muslim community and particularly at the mosque. And somebody at the mosque said to me, do you know he's got another address that he's recently moved to? And gave me the address. And so the next day, off I went. And it was just me. It was not far from Highgate, just a short walk away. And there was no other press there. And as I was walking to the front door, it wasn't cordoned off or anything. There was nobody or anybody or anything stopping me getting to the front door. But I certainly noticed people walking. They were clearly police walking around, some uniformed, some not. But it was all very low-key. As I'm walking up to the door opens and I'm greeted by a tall American chap.
An American?
Yeah, which was very unusual. On the face of it, what's an American doing opening the door? But obviously I worked out within seconds that you're obviously an American investigator from one of the agencies in America, and this must be a really high priority arrest for you to be here. But we kind of walked away from the building, which made me think there must be something in that building you don't want me to see.
So Amardeep, you were more or less turned away when you approached that first time 24 years ago. But you can now tell us a bit more of what was actually happening in that house. So in the days after 9/11, what was happening there?
Okay, so the police actually raided 3 properties or addresses, one being the Highgate Street, the other one being Dymoke Street. And also, as I said before, Omar al-Bayoumi was ostensibly a mature student at Aston University. So they searched his office in Aston University. Dymoke Street was searched, Highgate Street was searched, but it was Dymoke Street that unearthed piles of evidence there, or material that was pertinent to the inquiry, shall we say. Videotapes, up to 80 videotapes, handwritten address books, 150 pages long, other letters, other photos, other videos, his phone records. He had been carrying this around with him, and it was all there and all gathered and scrutinised.
British police were the ones who raided al-Bayoumy's 3 properties, and they bagged and labeled all of this material, piles and piles of it. But it was then immediately handed to American investigators. The FBI were running the show here. They were the ones deciding what evidence to share with the 2 British detectives interrogating al-Bayoumi in London.
I'll show you a copy of a bank card that you had in your possession.
There is a kind of convention, I suppose, when it comes to agencies operating on foreign soil. There is a certain protocol when it comes to handling evidence and processing evidence.
So you can clearly see on there that it's a Bank of America Visa card, and it has your name on the bottom of the card. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And what it means essentially is it was an FBI warrant. They had originated the warrant, so it's their investigation. They're the lead.
And can we confirm that that was the card which you had in your possession last night?
So what happens is the interrogating officers would be part of a process known as the tunnel.
How many trips have you made recently to America?
Which is a kind of informal term of basically tunnel vision, I suppose. And what that means is the FBI had a team of analysts in London who, as the evidence was being collected from these three addresses, these three Birmingham addresses, it was being bagged up and it wasn't being analysed at all by any British officers. It was immediately passed to the FBI.
Have you, through your job in civil aviation, have you ever learned to fly?
No.
The British police were totally blind.
Quite sure?
Yeah.
They were totally reliant on what the FBI told them. But you would expect that it's in everybody's interests that if there is any incriminating evidence, for it to be handed to the investigating officers who can then put it to him in real time, ask him about this. We found this in his house. What's he got to say about this? So in theory, that is what should have happened.
Only that didn't happen. We now know that information marked as the most critical, found at al-Bayoumy's 3 properties, was not shared with the British detectives interrogating him. And days later, al-Bayoumi would walk out of that British police department a free man. And Amardeep, we should say that Omar al-Bayoumi has always denied any involvement in the 9/11 terrorist attacks. You managed to speak to one of the British detectives who arrested and interrogated al-Bayoumi, right? DC David Campbell.
Yes, we managed to track, or my partner, Liz Harris, who's worked on this story with me, managed to track him down. It wasn't easy. SO13 officers, retired or otherwise, rarely advertise their presence on the internet. But we managed to find him, or Liz managed to find him. And it was a case of, well, what now? What do you say to an SO13 officer? Is he really going to want to speak about this 23 years later? And then Liz actually made the phone call to him. And it went something like this. So Liz has called him up. He knows what it's about. And there's a bit of a pause on the other line. And Liz is fully expecting him to say, well, I've got nothing to say. I can't say anything, and kind of put the phone down and don't call me again. But the opposite happened. There was a bit of a pause, and then David said something along the lines of, I've been waiting 23 years for this call.
Wow. That's next time, in the second part of this special investigation. This series was written and produced by me, Taryn Siegel. You can read Amardeep and Liz's full investigation right now at thetimes.com with a subscription. We'll be back tomorrow with part 2. The executive producers were Dan Box and Kate Lamble. Sound design was by Tiffany DeMack, with our theme tune by Mal Licetto. If you have any thoughts on what you've heard so far, we want to hear it. Leave us a comment if you're listening on Spotify, or send us an email at thestory@thetimes.com. Thanks for listening. See you tomorrow. Cafe in Culver City, Los Angeles. It's a breezy, sunny day. Looming over the cafe nearby is a beautiful white stone mosque. One of the men is young, about 22 years old. The other is a bit older, in his mid-40s. At a pause in their conversation, the older man's face suddenly brightens. He will later tell police that it's at this moment his ears suddenly caught a sound he didn't expect to hear thousands of miles away from his home in Saudi Arabia. 2 young men at the table next to theirs are speaking Gulf Arabic, his own dialect. He leans over and introduces himself. Police would later identify those 2 young men speaking Gulf Arabic as Khalid al-Madar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, 2 of the 9/11 hijackers. They were the muscle men who would overpower crew and passengers aboard a Boeing 757, plunging it into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. The older man, sitting at the table next to them, who introduced himself, was Omar al-Bayoumi. Today, 24 years on from 9/11, al-Bayoumi stands accused of being a Saudi agent who helped the hijackers carry out the worst terrorist attack in history. He has always denied this. And for the first time, we can tell you the full story of al-Bayoumi's links to the hijackers and how he was let go by British police, acting under the instruction of American agents.
The law at the time, in fact, had only recently been passed in the UK. The Anti-Terrorism Act 2000 meant that you could only keep terror suspects for a maximum of 7 days after arrest. And then after that, if you want to keep them longer, you must present some new evidence or charge them or release them.
Meaning from the moment of al-Bayoumi's arrest, the clock is ticking. The police have 7 days. Over the course of that week, there would be extraordinary revelations, but also leads unfollowed and crucial information not shared. So what went wrong? I'm Taryn Siegel, a producer at The Story. From the Sunday Times, this is The 9/11 Suspect, Part 2, 7 Days.
So the Saudi mature student Omar al-Bayoumi was arrested by British detectives David Campbell and Ian Dean in Birmingham on Friday, September the 21st, 2001. That's just 10 days after the 9/11 attacks.
Amardeep Basi is a journalist. He's been following the story of Omar al-Bayoumi ever since his arrest. At the time, Amardeep was a reporter based in Birmingham.
So al-Bayoumi was a person of interest because immediately after 9/11, FBI agents were looking for clues. They found a parked car at Washington Dulles Airport, a blue Toyota Corolla. They linked that to the 2 of the Pentagon hijackers, Madar and Hazmi. That then led agents to San Diego. Now, once they got to San Diego, they spoke to locals, and a lot of people said that the 2 hijackers were often seen in the company of another Arab who looked a bit older, and they named him as Omar al-Bayoumi. So they bring him down to London, to Paddington Green Police Station, where David Campbell is based. Now, David is a member of a unit called SO13. SO13 is the elite Metropolitan Police counter-terrorism unit. It used to be called the Bomb Squad, but it's basically the officers that deal with terrorist events in the UK.
And you and your partner, Liz Harris, actually managed to speak to David Campbell. Is that right?
Yes, we did.
Sometimes in interviews, it's like smoke and mirrors.
David didn't want the recording of his interview with Liz and Amardeep used on this podcast, so we've had an actor read what he told them.
A suspect will give you either what they think you're looking for or something that can divert your attention.
The smoke and mirrors would be even murkier for Campbell and Dean this time. Because even though they were the ones who actually arrested al-Bayoumi and took him down to London for questioning, since this was an arrest about 9/11, outside of the interrogation room, it was the FBI who were running the show.
Really, the 2 detectives, the 2 British detectives, are totally in the hands of the American investigators as to how much they know about al-Bayoumi. So if you remember, I was talking about something known as the tunnel process.
The tunnel is an international protocol. It's used when foreign agencies, like the FBI, are working here in the UK. It meant that while al-Bayoumi's 3 properties in Birmingham were being searched by British police, who bundled up and labeled bags and bags of evidence, it was then all immediately handed over to the American investigators for analysis. It was then up to the FBI what they chose to share with Dean and Campbell.
The detectives have been given certain information by the FBI, some bit of background about al-Bayoumi, general things they want to talk about, but nothing specific, no great detail.
This interview is being audio and video recorded.
It's September 22nd, 2001, the first day of the interrogation. It's just past 8 p.m. and al-Bayoumi is brought from his cell into the interrogation room. Because the clock starts ticking at the moment of his arrest, detectives have 6 days left to find the truth.
The first day really is quite procedural, really, I suppose. They ask him if he's happy for the interview to be recorded. And straight away, Bayoumi says something quite telling in that he says, well, I'd need to get permission or speak to my embassy.
Let me ask them now if I can call, if it's okay for video or for audio or something like that. I'm not sure. Okay.
He's talking about calling up and getting advice from the embassy for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in London, not the consulate. He's not talking about getting counsel from the solicitor who's sat right next to him. He's talking about the embassy, which isn't normal for an ordinary citizen. He doesn't want the interview to be recorded on video.
Okay.
He's happy for it to be audio. Obviously, they have to explain to him what the charge is.
We mentioned the reasons why you have been arrested, and those are because we believed you were involved in the preparation, instigation, or commission of acts of terrorism.
But then the nature of the questioning is quite soft, I suppose.
What are your interests? It was very evident last night that you're a family man. What are your other interests apart from that?
When I was in Saudi, I played squash.
We're not trying to trick you here. We're just asking you some basic questions. Where are you from? What do you do? And it's all very kind of informal. And you can see the two detectives go out their way to try and make him feel comfortable.
The officers learned that al-Bayoumi was born in 1957 in the village of Al-Hijra in Saudi Arabia. He moved to America in 1994 to San Diego to study English and eventually got a master's degree there. He was working for a private aviation company on loan from the Saudi Presidency of Civil Aviation. In October 2000, the company sponsored him to move to Birmingham and start a PhD in business management at Aston University. And yes, he also loves playing squash.
You can see they're feeling each other out. David and Ian are trying to work out, well, what is this guy exactly?
You spoke to David, to DC Campbell. What did he make of al-Bayoumi on that first day?
Not much. I mean, he said, there was nothing in his demeanour that suggested that he's some kind of big terrorist or somebody who's dangerous.
Well, he was, as I recall, quite a well-built guy. At no stage was he ever physically threatening at all. That just wasn't his personality. Originally, he was very quiet. He only talked when he was asked questions.
This interview is being tape recorded. I'm Detective Constable Ian Campbell.
September 23rd, around midday, al-Bayoumi is once again taken from his cell and brought into the interrogation room. They have 5 days left.
So on the second day, we start getting into specifics. And it's quite clear that DC's Campbell and Ian Dean have been given an outline of what the FBI suspect Bayoumi of doing specifically. When the FBI made investigations or made inquiries in San Diego in those days after 9/11, they discovered that Omar al-Bayoumi had acted as a guarantor for a flat for the two Pentagon hijackers, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. They were the two first hijackers to arrive in the USA. They arrived in California in January 2000.
And al-Bayoumi acted as a guarantor to them when they arrived.
Yeah.
Did you stand as guarantor for anyone whilst you were at that address?
For 152?
Whilst you were living at that address, did you stand as guarantor for anyone else?
I'm not sure.
And you can see the tension rising.
I find it hard to believe that you don't remember undertaking this financial agreement. You don't just say, to a landlord, I will guarantee this person, if you don't know who that person is?
Yeah, it happened.
Was it more than once?
I'm not sure.
A few hours later, they start to make some progress. Al-Bayoumi finally admits that he might remember a couple of men who he once acted as guarantor for.
Yeah, I remember now the guy, but it's not in my top of tongue. I think they came from Mecca, from Mecca City, from Saudi Arabia.
Okay. Yeah. Anything else? Keep going.
But,
The two men from Mecca City in Saudi Arabia, who Al-Bayoumi is starting to remember he may have acted as guarantor for, the police know to be the two Pentagon hijackers. But Al-Bayoumi hasn't actually named them. At this point, he keeps it vague, saying there may have been a couple of Saudi men he might have helped in San Diego.
And then he talks about, or he's pressed into talking about, well, how did you meet these guys?
How did you meet them?
Those guys, once I went to Los Angeles with Osama, American guy. Okay, he's Muslim also.
So Bayoumi traveled from San Diego, from his home in San Diego, to Los Angeles with a young Muslim convert who drove with him. And the way he tells it is, on their way back home, they decided to get something to eat on Venice Boulevard. And then he notices two young Arab men, and he voluntarily went up to them and basically started talking, saying, "Who are you? I'm a Saudi as well."
They said, we have been here for about 24 days and we want to go to English school and we don't know how to go there. And then I said, I'm in San Diego, I'm not from the city, and we gonna back now to San Diego. But if you need help or something like that, just call me. I think I gave them my phone number. And actually, I forgot their names now.
Al-Bayoumi says he doesn't remember their names, but the detectives continue to press him until slowly he starts to remember.
Like knife or something like that.
Knife.
I think.
How would you spell that?
I think N-A-N-I-W-F, I think, Nawaf.
Okay.
I think.
Nawaf, as in Nawaf al-Hazmi, one of the Pentagon hijackers. DC Dean keeps pressing him. What about the other guy? Can he remember what they were wearing? What age they were? Al-Bayoumi says he thinks they may have been 22, 23. And then, 10 minutes later, Dean turns the questioning over to DC Campbell. And after hours of back and forth, misremembering, suddenly something shifts.
So I'll just hand back to Dave and we'll continue when we're...
What were their names again?
I think the first one, Nawaf, I think.
And the second?
Second one, I think Khalid.
Khalid?
Khalid.
Nawaf and Khalid.
This was the first major breakthrough.
3 days after that meeting in Los Angeles, where they exchanged phone numbers, Nawaf and Khalid, the two hijackers, would take Al-Bayoumi up on his offer. They would arrive at the Islamic Center of San Diego asking for him, and he would help them to find an apartment and open a bank account. Before they bring that day's interrogation to a close, DC Campbell has one more thing to say to Al-Bayoumi.
Do you not think it's strange us asking you specifically about these two men?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me put it very clearly for you so there's no misunderstanding. We believe that you have assisted two individuals, at least two individuals, but specifically these individuals, in the preparation, instigation or commission of acts of terrorism on the 11th of September. Do you understand that now?
Yeah, I understand that, but I didn't support anyone. I didn't accept any act like this at all.
Time by my watch is 7 minutes past 7. Now shall I conclude the interview? This interview is being tape recorded. I'm Detective
September 24th, 4 days left.
So on day 3, DC Campbell wheels in 3 bags full of videotapes. Now these bags are full to the brim of tapes that have been collected and seized from Bayoumy's properties.
Now, as you can see, we have brought 3 bags, one of a substantial number of videos, and 2 other bags of videos which have been seized from your home address in Birmingham.
Something like 80 videotapes in there. Now this bag is sealed and has basically come straight from Birmingham. Nobody's had a chance to analyse it, analyse any of the videotapes. They've literally, been taken out of the house and brought immediately to Paddington Green.
But the FBI had an idea that these tapes might contain some of the most incriminating evidence. After the hijackers, Nawaf and Khalid, showed up in San Diego looking for al-Bayoumi, he not only helped them find a flat and open a bank account, but according to neighbors, he threw them a welcome party.
Neighbours and people in San Diego had told investigators that al-Bayoumi had some kind of party for them where there was a lot of men there and it had been recorded on camcorder.
And you said to us that you took a camcorder or a video of that gathering, yes?
Yeah.
And so one by one, going through these 80-odd videotapes, it's only towards the end when they get to number 65 of the videotapes that al-Bayoumi says, yeah, I think it's this one. In fact, it's 2 tapes he points out, and together with al-Bayoumi, they start watching them. They say to al-Bayoumi, you let us know when Khalid and Nawaf appear on the screen. It basically shows a very bare-looking apartment in San Diego where there are what we know now 29 men, and the video starts with everybody literally introducing themselves. I am such and such, and they are all Saudi officials and dignitaries, some with diplomatic status. It's obviously a celebration of some kind, and they're all basically having a feast. You've got this big lamb and rice.
Makes me hungry, that is. It's like a big turkey.
So they're watching this tape together, and does he identify Khalid and Nawaf at any point?
No, he doesn't. But they are there. Khalid Madar, you see quite clearly in the kitchen, sort of front on, you can see his face, and he's in the kitchen preparing food. Nawaf al-Hazmi, you kind of see the back of his head and kind of fleeting sideways, but his name is clearly said a few times. Greetings, Nawaf.
The tape ends, and al-Bayoumi tells the police officers that neither Nawaf nor Khalid have appeared on screen.
Okay, so as long as you're clear that even though we didn't get what we were seeking on the video, that it was a waste of time, at least we are now clear that the people that we were seeking to identify are not on these videotapes.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
The officers have just looked into the eyes of one of the hijackers and heard the voice of another. But they don't press al-Bayoumi on this. The FBI knew what the hijackers looked like, but it's unclear if they shared this with the British detectives.
I spoke to David Campbell about what happened that day, and he says he really can't remember whether he'd seen photographs of the hijackers or not.
If they did know what the hijackers looked like, why didn't they question al-Bayoumi when Khalid appeared on screen? If they didn't know, why didn't the FBI share that crucial information with them? Whatever the reason, this home video of al-Bayoumi and 2 of the 9/11 hijackers is ejected from the TV with no further questions. And 3 bags of videotapes are wheeled away. And there's something else. Left at the bottom of that bag of tapes is one clearly labeled Washington Trip, 1999. Capitol Hill. al-Bayoumi zooms in on 2 Lincoln Town cars parked next to a side entrance. Their cars. You said that in the plan. This was filmed 2 months after al-Qaeda chose Capitol Hill as one of their targets for 9/11. What is the plan that al-Bayoumi is referring to? It would be decades before anyone saw this tape. So Amrdeep, Omar al-Bayoumi has been taken into police custody, as you've been telling us. He was arrested under suspicion of involvement in the preparation, instigation, or commission of acts of terrorism. He's already been there for 3 days, and the police have 7 days before they need to either charge him or release him.
That's right. The clock is now ticking, so things are hotting up. There's also something rather unusual that's been taking place throughout his custody. It's been alleged that throughout his detention, al-Bayoumi had been receiving visits from an unnamed, at this moment, quite high-level Saudi diplomat who was based at the embassy in London, the Saudi Arabian embassy based in London.
Wow.
And that is quite unusual for certainly a high-level diplomat, somebody with diplomatic status, to actually come in and see a citizen, unless, it's something that's going to affect the government or has real, reverberations and connotations.
So is it unusual that it's a visit from the embassy full stop, or is it unusual that it's a high-ranking diplomat from the Saudi Arabian embassy?
Both really. Certainly the latter really stands out. Okay, if you were involved in the government in some way, you may get a visit from a consular, a commissioner, but not from the embassy. And then to further say it's a high-ranking diplomat, somebody who's got diplomatic official status, that is highly unusual.
I mean, on the other hand, if I was arrested in another country, I would probably take a lot of solace in a visit from, in my case, the American embassy. I'd be really reassured they were interested in my detention. I mean, is there any actual evidence that Omar al-Bayoumi is connected to Saudi intelligence?
So we do know that Omar al-Bayoumi had been the subject of a FBI investigation back in 1998 when he was in San Diego. The FBI were reacting to reports from a maintenance man who had visited one of his properties and was doing some work on the sink, I think. And underneath the sink, he reported seeing a box with wires coming out of it, which obviously was concerning. He's then called law enforcement. And then this obviously was passed on to the FBI. They investigated it. They carried out inquiries in the area. They spoke to members of the local Muslim community. And people basically told agents that they believed Omar al-Bayoumi was some kind of spy.
This is what his neighbors believed.
This is what his neighbors and people in the local Muslim community, people who had seen him at the mosque and in and around San Diego, the fact that he was always carrying a video camera, he had his JVC camcorder with him pretty much at all times. He would film at the mosque, he would film at gatherings and outings they had together, which made people slightly suspicious about him. They felt that he may be somehow involved with the Saudi intelligence services, that somehow he's keeping and monitoring their behavior, reporting back any suspicious or dissident behavior.
What did al-Bayoumi say to those accusations?
Al-Bayoumi went on to say that he was quite upset by these allegations, that he clearly said that he's not a spy, and talked about, as I said, being upset that people thought this about him.
So the FBI opens an investigation in 1998, and then what happens?
So the investigation winds down within a year, and certainly by 1999, the investigation is closed. There's no further action. Yet none of this was shared with the British police, and certainly not with DC Campbell and DC Ian Dean, who were interviewing Omar al-Bayoumi. They had no idea that the person they're sitting in front of and interrogating had already been the subject of quite serious allegations and an ensuing investigation in America.
This interview is being tape recorded. I'm Detective Constable David Campbell, attached to the
September 25th, 2001. Al-Bayoumi is reseated across the interrogation table. There are 3 days left to either charge him or release him.
So the next line of questioning, they start talking him about, well, your time in America, and in particular his finances.
On the 16th of February 1999.
16th February?
Yeah. $99.85. 23rd of September, same amount.
So the detectives reveal or ask him about the fact that between February 1999 and January 2001, something like $32,500 had been deposited in accounts that he can access.
What do these transactions relate to?
I'm not sure exactly, but I have to figure out. Yeah, there's a reason for it.
Each time these deposits are made, they are just under $10,000.
But the reason to us looks as if unknown people are giving you lots of money.
No.
This seems to be large amounts of money, which is untraceable.
Basically, if anything is deposited more than $10,000, it would alert the authorities, and you'd have to explain where this money has come from. But if you keep below $10,000, it just kind of goes through.
2 transactions which were only $15 on one and $5 on the other below that threshold.
So it seems to have been a concerted effort to not hand this money over into his account in one big delivery, because that would alert the authorities.
And we believe that you're being funded and you're funding people for terrorist activities.
No.
Are you sure?
No, at all. No, I don't. No.
You don't?
No.
Think about your answers very carefully, Omar.
Yeah.
By the end of the week, on the final day of the interrogation, the detectives have come to their own conclusions.
So the officers conclude that there are too many coincidences here, that there are too many things that just don't add up. So the police officers put all this to Al-Bayoumi right at the end. They say, on the 15th of January 2000, you received a phone call.
And we believe that phone call was from the hijackers to let you know that they had entered the US successfully.
They tell Bayoumi that you then went to Los Angeles to meet these hijackers.
We believe that you've taken these people by your car from Los Angeles to San Diego.
They go on to say that you have helped these men.
You have then helped these men, fraudulently helped these men.
You've helped them get accommodation. You've helped them open a bank account.
I believe that during this period of time, substantial amounts of money have been wired to you in the US so that you could facilitate them whilst they were engaging in their activities in the US.
You arranged a meeting in front of a lot of influential people at their apartment.
You've arranged a meeting in their home address, their apartment, with a number of influential people. And you would only do that if you knew these people well.
So they put it to him bluntly. They say that there's 2 conclusions here.
So there's 2 conclusions here. One, that you're a very unlucky man and you have been involved in this unfortunate conspiracy that's gone on. Or the other is that you're a guilty man and you are responsible for killing some 7,000 people.
I'm, honest people, honest man, and I don't want. And I have also I care by my family. The truth will appear one day.
Well, yeah. There is only one version of the truth, or more.
I thought the case stunk to high heaven.
This, again, is what DC David Campbell told Liz and Amardeep in an interview. We've had an actor read what he said to them.
There were too many coincidences. If that guy played the lottery, he'd be winning every single week.
So what do? They decide to charge him?
Well, because it was an FBI warrant, an FBI-led investigation, it would be the FBI that makes the decision whether to charge him, release him. The ultimate decision lies with the FBI, or ultimately lies with the Department of Justice, which in effect is, the Crown Prosecution Service in the UK. They make the decision. So what happens is DC Campbell, DC Dean, together with their 2 superiors, go to Scotland Yard, 15th floor office, where they have a conference call with somebody from the Department of Justice.
I tried my very, very best to convince the US Justice Department that they needed to extradite him.
So that was one of the options, and Campbell, as he's told us, fully expected that to be the option, that surely the Americans will want him back in America. There's so much that he's got to answer for, it seems. So they spend an hour presenting their arguments and recommendation that at least he should be extradited, and they're fully expecting that to happen. And what they're also expecting is that, there's a week worth of interviews here. Surely the Department of Justice will want to look at all of this and see the lay of the land and see where this fits in. And they'll probably give us a decision in a few days, maybe. And so, to their absolute surprise, the person from the Department of Justice instantly makes a decision.
He said there was insufficient evidence to justify extradition.
There and there on the spot, after an hour, the answer is no, let him go. As blunt as that.
I was gobsmacked, shocked. That's the way I felt about it.
At the end of the call, there's a long silence as the officers digest this decision from the U.S. Department of Justice.
I still think about it to this day, and I'm still shocked.
Later that day, Omar al-Bayoumi, who would always deny having any involvement in the 9/11 terrorist attacks, walked free and returned to Birmingham. 8 months later, Met Police made 2 copies of all of the evidence found at al-Bayoumi's 3 Birmingham addresses, one for themselves and one for the FBI. But all of the original materials were handed back to al-Bayoumi. In August 2002, al-Bayoumi left for Saudi Arabia for good, taking all of the original evidence with him. It would be 10 years before any of it would come to light again.
In 2012, an FBI technician was clearing out a storeroom in a police lockup in Washington, D.C. Buried in an untidy pile of documents and folders in a crate that was marked al-Bayoumi, the technician looked inside, and what they found took their breath away.
That's next time, on the final part of this special investigation. This series was written and produced by me, Taryn Siegel. You can read Amardeep Bassi and Liz Harris's full investigation right now at thetimes.com. We'll be back tomorrow with part 3. The executive producers were Dan Box and Kate Lamble. Sound design is by Tiffany DeMack, with our theme tune by Mal Lassetto. If you have any thoughts on what you've heard so far, we want to hear it. Leave us a comment if you're listening on Spotify, or send us an email at thestory@thetimes.com. Thanks for listening. See you tomorrow.
Commission reported its findings in 2004. It's kind of now seen as the official report on what happened in 9/11.
The 9/11 Commission report runs to over 500 pages. It basically concluded that the 9/11 attacks were carried out by al-Qaeda terrorists who exploited gaps in U.S. intelligence, especially a lack of coordination between agencies like the CIA and the FBI. On the issue of foreign funding, however, the Commission found no evidence that the Saudi government as an institution or senior Saudi officials funded al-Qaeda. And Omar al-Bayoumi himself is mentioned. The report said there was no credible evidence he knowingly aided extremist groups. But not everyone agreed.
Some people weren't happy that the report was thorough enough. And so within the FBI, you obviously had San Diego field officers who would have been investigating the Pentagon hijackers Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, and they weren't satisfied with the 9/11 Commission's report. They thought there was more to this Saudi connection.
And that division of the FBI in San Diego was looking into this because the 2 hijackers you mentioned were living in San Diego before the attack, before 9/11.
That's right. Because they were the first 2 hijackers to even enter the USA via California, there was a long time to look at what they'd been doing.
It was San Diego investigators going door to door in the days after 9/11 who had first identified al-Bayoumi. His old neighbor said the hijackers were often hanging out with him.
San Diego FBI field officers were quite concerned when they saw the 9/11 Commission report because it ostensibly gave al-Bayoumi, a clean bill of health. And they thought there was more there. And so they continued their own kind of offshoot, which they called Operation Encore. So Operation Encore really sort of zeroed down on this Saudi support network and what part did al-Bayoumi play. And so they were very keen to find out, well, how did Omar al-Bayoumi meet these two hijackers and end up being a guarantor and opening bank accounts for them? And they managed to get hold of a young man called Kaysen Morgan. Now, he was just 22, was quite a recent convert to Islam. And he told Operation Encore officers that he had accompanied Omar al-Bayoumi to that trip to the consulate in LA to renew the passport.
Remember, al-Bayoumi told British police he drove to LA with a young Muslim convert.
I went to Los Angeles with Osama, American guy. Okay, he's Muslim also.
They stopped for a bite to eat before heading home. And when he suddenly heard some young men at the next table speaking his dialect, he decided to introduce himself.
They said, we have been here for about 24 days and we want to go to English school and we don't know how to go there.
He gave them his phone number and said, why don't you come to San Diego? Which Nawaf and Khalid, two of the Pentagon hijackers, did a few days later.
Now, Kaysen gives a different version. He says that he and Omar al-Bayoumi went and sat in the restaurant first, that it seemed like that al-Bayoumi had deliberately picked a seat near the window, and that the two hijackers, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, came in later, and that it seemed like, Kaysen said that it seemed like Omar al-Bayoumi was looking out for them, that he was looking through the window and kind of almost expecting them. He then says that Khalid and Nawaf sat some distance away from their table, to the point that it would have been impossible to pick up any speech and recognize their accent, as al-Bayoumi had said to the detectives. Kaysen then goes on to say that al-Bayoumi deliberately went over to the table where Mihdhar and Hazmi were sat, and that all three of them were speaking for about 30 minutes in Arabic. And because Kaysen doesn't understand Arabic, he says he doesn't know what they were talking about. But he certainly doesn't give this meeting the flavour of it being accidental.
And then, in 2012, 5 years after Operation Encore began, officers in San Diego got a phone call which would break open their investigation.
It was Operation Encore who received the phone call from the evidence technician who we spoke about earlier in Washington, who had come across this crate of evidence marked Omar al-Bayoumi. Luckily, the technician realized, well, this will be of interest to the San Diego field officers, and directly called them.
So what did they find when this crate of documents, of materials, were eventually given to Operation Encore from the evidence technician?
So the most astounding piece of evidence they found was a small notebook made in America by a company called Topps. And in this notepad, I think it was something like 5 inches by 8 inches, lined notepad, yellow paper, was a hand-drawn diagram.
And what did this diagram look like?
So I've actually got a copy of the diagram here.
Oh, wow. So this is it. So
this is it, yeah.
Oh, this is a photo of
This is the
notepad.
photo taken by the West Midlands Police. As soon as they found it, they took a picture of it, and you can see it's opened up on a kind of yellow page lined notepad, as I said, about 5 by 8 inches. And you're seeing this notepad that's been opened up on the relevant page, and you see there written in blue ink, starts off with what looks like some kind of equation. D equals this, and then there's the kind of
radical H, that's
equation mark.
H plus, it's not a particularly mathematically advanced equation, if you have any maths background.
Yeah, it seems like doodling almost, like scribbles. But again, they are very exact numbers.
Yeah.
There's not much crossing out. Whoever's written this seems to be quite sure of these details. But again, written not in a very technical way, shall we say. There's a crude picture of an aeroplane.
Right, this tiny little picture.
Yeah, tiny little plane, which is clearly an airplane.
And there's a dotted line and an H underneath.
Yeah.
So I guess H is height.
Yeah, it actually explains that the H means height So he's actually put
it actually says equals height.
Yeah. And the other one I think was
the
distance.
plane from the Earth in miles.
That's right. Yeah, so it's very particular. So it's basically showing some kind of line of sight of the aeroplane with, as I said, these lines that seem to show a downward trajectory, shall we say.
And then distance from, it says this, like it actually says in words.
You spelt it out in English.
Spelt it out in English. Distance from the plane to horizon.
Yeah.
Huh. And then there's a bunch of numbers as well, and another equation, 2,500 equals h squared plus 8,000 h.
And it obviously involves aviation and distance and lines of sight.
At the bottom of the notebook page is a seemingly random list of numbers. 44, 25, 80, 76. But when the numbers were analyzed, a pattern emerged.
They actually coincide with the kind of coordinates of what's known as way stations on the eastern seaboard of America. Now that sounds very complicated, but it's essentially if a pilot doesn't have any electronic aids and wants to land, you have these kind of navigational aids called waypoints, and they're dotted around America, and their positions are public. You know, you can find out where these beacons, almost you could say, are situated.
And these way stations on the eastern seaboard of the U.S. are so important because of what we've learned since about the planning of the 9/11 attacks.
Al-Qaeda released a video a year after 9/11 where Al-Qaeda first admitted that they carried it out. The video came out actually on the anniversary of 9/11 in 2002. And it was quite a lengthy video in which bin Laden finally admits, we did this operation. There is also other footage of the hijackers sort of training in Afghanistan in preparation for 9/11. And at one point you see a map in the background. You see the hijackers or some of the hijackers, and in the background is a map which is pointing out the way stations on the eastern seaboard of America, which tally with this diagram.
And this diagram, the police detectives, the British police detectives interrogating al-Bayoumi, they hadn't seen this when they arrested him?
No, they were never told about the existence of this plane diagram at all throughout that week of interrogating, even though we know for a fact that this diagram was found by the police during the search within 24 hours, certainly by the 22nd of September. It had been bagged. Not only had it been bagged, a note had been put on there that this is a diagram that seems to show some kind of plane equations, and it was marked Category 1, which basically means this is urgent. You need to look at this soon.
And it was handed to the FBI, and then it was not handed to the police detectives.
Again, because of international protocol, the British officers didn't have the authority to analyse it themselves. And especially if anything had American written on it, as I said, the fact that this notebook was made in the USA by a company called Topps meant the British had to hand it over immediately to the FBI, and the FBI choose whether to pass that on to the interviewing officers who are sat in the room with al-Bayoumi. And in this instance, they chose not to share this with those interviewing officers.
We can sit here today and look at this drawing made by al-Bayoumi, hold a printout of this sketch of a plane and equations in our hands, because it was declassified by President Biden in 2021. It was part of a move to declassify loads of evidence related to 9/11 investigations. And it was only then that DC David Campbell, who had interrogated al-Bayoumi for 7 days before being forced to let him go, saw it for the first time on YouTube.
He told me that he was absolutely stunned when he saw it. He was very angry and frustrated that he hadn't been given this, considering it was in the house. He was interviewing Bayoumi, and his first thought really was how bad for the families that this hadn't come out, and that he felt almost that he hadn't been able to do his job as an interrogator properly.
So, Amardeep, at the end of all of this, what does Operation Encore finally conclude? And particularly, what do they conclude about al-Bayoumi?
Well, Encore certainly threw up more questions. They felt that the Commission report's findings that al-Bayoumi was an innocent weren't quite correct and warranted further investigation. And the result was that they felt Bumi had a lot more questions to answer.
And there was one woman who was going to get those answers.
It's hard to put into words what betrayal feels like. I mean, that's what it is. It's a betrayal. He should have been extradited to the United States. He should have been held responsible.
Amrity, you mentioned that Operation Encore, this special investigation within the FBI that was set up because they weren't satisfied with the findings of the 9/11 Commission. They concluded that Omar al-Bayoumi had more to answer for. And the reason that we're finally getting answers today is basically down to kind of a battle being waged by some of the victims' families who weren't satisfied with the official version of events of what happened on 9/11. We actually heard from the woman kind of leading the charge, Terry Strada, in episode 1. Her husband, Tom, died in the 9/11 terrorist attacks. He was working at the World Trade Center that morning. Can you just remind us, how did you come to be in touch with her?
So, again, Terry was somebody that my partner, Liz, who worked on this story with me, managed to track down. She'd been very vocal, Terry, as regards to wanting answers and not really accepting the official version that had come out.
September 11th brought a lot more horrors than just, somebody's died and you're going to bury them, and you're going to have a funeral, and you're going to possibly, move on from that point. There was no recovery of Tom. Nothing. And because you don't have recovery, it makes it a little bit more difficult and challenging to really get your children to understand that he is gone and that he's not coming back. So the first couple of months, definitely past Christmas, that constant having to reassure my children that their father was dead was really horrific. And now I would say there's a lot of anger building because of the damage I can see that's happened to my children and that they're having to live through this.
As the days and weeks after Tom's death unfolded and Terry's grief and anger built, she finally managed to connect with some other women who were going through the same thing. And they suggested that there might be something Terry could do about her overwhelming anger and confusion.
So I was in a support group that was wonderful with other widows. And one day somebody said there was going to be an attorney in South Jersey that was going to talk about, a lawsuit that we could possibly join. And there weren't any details about it. And I didn't know very much at all.
One day in November, 2 months after losing her husband, Terry went down to a law firm in New Jersey where she met a man named Ron Motley.
Not a very tall man in stature, but a huge man in personality, and he was charismatic, and he reminded me of Tom right away. The first thing out of his mouth was, your government is lying to you. They're lying to you that there was no state sponsors of September 11th.
While the U.S. administration focused on invading Afghanistan and killing bin Laden, Motley's firm was proposing a lawsuit to hunt down and hold accountable anyone who provided material support to al-Qaeda, including banks, charities, individuals, and crucially, the country that was the source of 15 of the 19 hijackers, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
And he said it was the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia that was responsible for financing al-Qaeda. We didn't know everything. I didn't know. I was going to learn what I've learned over the past 20 years. But if we didn't have the lawsuit, which would allow us discovery, we were never going to know the full truth. So I signed on right away and became an advocate for the families, because within the first year, less than a year, we went to D.C. and we stood on a stage and we announced to the world we were suing the Saudis, and we were going to bankrupt terrorism.
By August 2002, they had formed a steering committee, the 9/11 Families United to Bankrupt Terrorism, and filed a $1 trillion lawsuit against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Painstakingly, over the next 2 decades, the families and their lawyers went looking for evidence to build their case, including all the material seized from Omar al-Bayyoumi's 3 properties in Birmingham. Not even Operation Encore had managed to get their hands on every piece of this evidence from FBI Central Command. So the families decided to take a different approach.
So in the end, the plaintiffs' lawyers realised, well, maybe the Metropolitan Police have got copies. In fact, they knew they had copies of the evidence because the original evidence was returned to al-Bayoumi when he was released. But the MPS, Metropolitan Police Service, had kept a copy, one for themselves and one for the FBI. And so the plaintiffs' lawyers sought to go after getting those copies, which meant they had to come to the UK, had to get a High Court order compelling the Metropolitan Police to hand them over. And the Metropolitan Police did not fight back and very diligently handed over the last 2 years in various tranches all the evidence that was seized.
Wow. And what do they find?
So what was found at al-Bayyoumi's residences, and there were, as I said, there were 3 addresses that were raided. The 2 houses that he'd been living in Birmingham, and also his office at Aston University. Most of the evidence was found at Dymoke Street, which he had only recently moved into. And I'm talking boxes of evidence, some found in the garage, some found in the house. But essentially he had documented everything he had done for the last 3 or 4 years. Wow. And what I mean by documented is almost in a report kind of way. I did this, I've done that. Lots of personal letters that are sent to some of the highest ranking Saudi officials in Riyadh. Wow. Members of something called the Ministry of Islamic Affairs. It's clear he's got links to these religious officials as well as diplomats, Saudi diplomats inside America, also back in Saudi Arabia. So lots of documents. Also found was a handwritten contacts book, 150 pages long, all written in hand mainly by al-Bayoumi. What was very telling was that in the contact book was a code name for one of the hijackers. Now, when I say code name, it's something called a kunya. And a kunya is basically the code name that Al-Qaeda would give its operatives. And these code names are highly secretive. Only the top tier of planners would know the code names. And in fact, all the 19 hijackers had code names or kunyas, but these kunyas weren't made public until that video that Al-Qaeda put out on the anniversary of 9/11 to say we did it. That was the first time that Osama bin Laden, one by one, tells the viewers these are the kunyas and why we chose them. In Bayyoumi's address book was the kunya for one of the hijackers. Wow. Now, only somebody on the top level would know that kunya. So that was very telling. What are you doing with the secret code name in your book? Another crucial thing they found was the 80 videotapes.
Oh, right. The 80 videotapes that were wheeled into the interrogation room when al-Bayoumi was being interviewed by the British police.
That's right. It was a bag of tapes and it was labelled as exhibit number PSS/100. And in there were a number of videotapes, including the welcoming party video with the 2 hijackers, which we've already spoken about.
Right.
But there was also another video that was marked Washington Trip, June 1999. So again, that would have piqued the interest of any investigator. He's videoing a Washington trip. Washington was going to be possibly one of the targets.
Yeah.
Capitol Hill. On the face of it, it might look like a tourist video, but then parts of it get quite un-tourist-like, shall we say.
Al-Bayoumi points the camera to a tower in the distance. He says, "This tower, whose name I haven't discovered yet. I will get over there, and I will report. I will report to you in detail what is there. Also, the airport is not far away. Here's the airplane taking off from there. In front of the Congress, there is no power nor strength except through Allah.
He also makes reference to a plan.
Their cars. You said that in the plan.
And he talks about my esteemed brothers. So whoever he's sending this video to or narrating it to is somebody who's quite senior. And he's panning towards where security guards are.
One of the side gates. Here are some security officers walking around the most important building. Here, we welcome you from the Capitol Hill, the American Congress.
It is, what has been described in court by the plaintiff's experts as a classic hostile reconnaissance video, what we might say in layman's terms as a casing video. And bear in mind, the timing of this video, June 1999, was only 2 months after we know that Al-Qaeda had picked their targets for 9/11, and one of the targets was going to be Capitol Hill.
This was the video, left at the bottom of the bags of tapes, which were wheeled out of the interrogation room, unwatched.
The interrogating officers didn't know about it. 9/11 Commission didn't know about it. It wasn't shared by the FBI to even their own field officers.
Omar al-Bayoumi has still to this day never been questioned about the Washington, D.C. video. But in June 2021, as part of the lawsuit brought by the families, al-Bayoumi did have to give an interview to their lawyers, what's known as a deposition in the States. There, he was asked about the plane diagram for the first time, but he claimed it was just doodling. When asked about the equations in the notebook, he said, quote, "It's just an equation, like any other equation." Omar al-Bayoumi has always denied any involvement in the 9/11 terrorist attacks, instead insisting he was a civil servant studying in the U.S. who met the 9/11 hijackers by coincidence. Why was so much information kept from the 9/11 Commission and from the British police detectives interrogating al-Bayoumi?
We can only speculate. Even the plaintiff's lawyers haven't actually used the word, this was deliberately buried and hidden by the FBI. But, as sensible people, you would have thought something certainly like the plane diagram and the Washington video would set alarm bells very early and would point to, who's behind this. So, yeah, we can only speculate, but the fact remains that within 24 hours, the Americans knew that there's a very strong Saudi connection here, but didn't follow it up.
We reached out to the FBI for the story, but they did not want to comment. Amardeep, bring us up to the present day. We've had years of evidence kind of slowly being uncovered and being made public.
Yeah.
What is happening now, like today?
So right now we're at a very critical juncture in the whole lawsuit. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia had put forward a motion to dismiss the case in its entirety, and that was heard for more than a year. Evidence was presented by the families to suggest that Saudi Arabia was involved, and the judge had been listening to all of this. A couple of weeks ago, Judge George Daniels, who's hearing the case in Manhattan, came back with a momentous decision. He basically denied Saudi Arabia's motion to dismiss the entire case and ruled in favour of the families, basically paving the way for a full civil trial and for further evidence to be presented to the court. In his decision, the judge said, and I quote, "The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia did not proffer sufficient evidence to the contrary. Although the kingdom attempts to offer seemingly innocent explanations or context, they are either self-contradictory or not strong enough to overcome the inference that the kingdom had employed Bayoumi and another Saudi official to assist the hijackers."
Wow. So the families of the victims of 9/11, they're allowed to proceed in their lawsuit against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So what does the lawsuit actually allege?
Well, according to Gavin Simpson, one of the lawyers for the 9/11 families, he told the court in the US, and I'm going to read this from the court filing.
Yeah.
He said, "The evidence is clear that Saudi Arabia deployed its officials and agents to serve in an illegal government enterprise that was extensively intertwined with terrorism, so that the agents were acting within their core mission when they helped integrate the hijackers into the United States." Close quotes. Now, Saudi Arabia has consistently and vehemently denied all the accusations.
We approached the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for comment on this story, but they did not respond.
We expect a lot of more evidence to come over the next few months. The case that has been going on over the last 20 years has been very restricted in its remit, and this really opens up the whole case, really, so that any evidence that the plaintiffs may have had and weren't able to present in earlier proceedings, it means they can really open up all that evidence now and present evidence which previously was inadmissible.
And Amrity, your story came out in the Sunday Times paper last week, and the very next day it was mentioned in Parliament. How did that feel?
It felt very satisfying.
Yesterday's Sunday Times revealed that in the aftermath of 9/11, the Metropolitan Police were forced to release Omar al-Bayoumi, believed to be a Saudi intelligence agent accused of supporting the hijackers, because the FBI withheld evidence.
It's not every day that your stories end up being talked about on the floor of the House of Commons.
The UK police and FBI had clear evidence that Omar al-Bayoumi assisted terrorists and had close links to...
But it was good to see that there was multi-party support for answers.
Yesterday's Sunday Times. And I accept that it raises a number of important questions that are absolutely worthy of scrutiny and are deserving of the attention of this House.
There was a call made for the Parliamentary Intelligence and Security Committee to launch an investigation.
That's its Secret Service. Madam Deputy Speaker, a full investigation by the Intelligence and Security Committee is needed, investigating why the FBI clearly avoided extraditing Mr. al-Bayoumi, and also exactly what the involvement of the Saudi government was.
Which now seems very likely, to find out exactly what happened in that week.
And Terry Strada, who, as we've said, is part of this group of victims' family members pushing for the lawsuit, how does she feel about what's happening right now?
Certainly she feels a lot of relief.
When the announcement came a couple weeks ago that Judge Daniels denied Saudi Arabia's motion to dismiss the case, paving the way for a full trial, Terry was at home making dinner.
The phone rang, and it was another 9/11 widow. And she just said, "Congratulations." And I said, "What happened?" She said, "You don't know." And I said, "I don't, but I know what you're going to tell me." I was elated and a huge feeling of relief that the decision, not only that it finally came in because it's been over a year, but that the judge said there's enough evidence. You can move forward with the case. That was just music to my ears. That is something we've been fighting for over 2 decades. For us, for American victims of terrorism, it's a huge victory. This is a strong deterrent for any nation that may be funding terrorist organizations to, that they can be held accountable in a U.S. court. That's the victory here, that you can be held accountable in a U.S. court if you fund a designated terrorist organization that harms or murders Americans on U.S. soil.
If the families are ultimately successful, it would be the first time the Saudi state has been held responsible for 9/11. And with $1 trillion price tag, It could be the largest civil lawsuit in history. It would also forever change our understanding of the world's worst terror attack.
It totally changes the whole premise of what happened after 9/11. The whole, was the whole war on terror based on a mistake? I mean, again, we can say with some authority now that certainly, the Saudi connection would have appeared within days of 9/11. Yet, America chose instead to wage a war of terror on Afghanistan, on Iraq. And Saudi Arabia wasn't touched in any shape or form when, if there is any hard evidence that goes over years, then that was the place they should have started.
This series was written and produced by me, Taryn Siegel. You can read Amardeep Bassi and Liz Harris's full investigation at thetimes.com with a subscription. The executive producers were Dan Box and Kate Lamble. Sound design was by Tiffany DeMack, with our theme tune by Mal Lassetto. If you have thoughts on this series, we really want to hear them. You can leave a comment if you're listening on Spotify, or send us an email at thestory@thetimes.com.